Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I'm excited to be here with you. And today we're going to be talking about how to reverse estrogen dominance naturally. So, different action steps that you can explore and investigate and see if these are possible steps for you, good steps for you. We're going to talk about triggers to estrogen dominance, what's driving this in people, and then, like I said, specific action steps that you can dive into and take a look at for more information. So let me pull up, we've got a lot pulled together for you this week. And just some quick reminders here that, of course, everything we're going to talk about is for informational, educational purposes. Not meant to treat, diagnose, cure, or prevent illness. So always work with your healthcare provider on health recommendations. Make sure that they're appropriate for you. You may see some links that are affiliate links, and this means that Mast 360 can make a small commission if you purchase through the link. We only recommend products we love and use personally or use in the practice. The commissions help support the newsletter, the website, these Facebook Lives, all the ongoing research, but it never costs you anything more. So if that calls to you, we really appreciate your support. And then the presentation will be copyright here. So we did go through the big picture of estrogen dominance a few weeks ago. And if you missed that, then at the end of this video, you can always just go over to our video section on Facebook, and you'll find that whole background in terms of what estrogen dominance is and how it can affect mast cells. And then today we're going to go through some specific action steps. So I see that people are still jumping on. If you're here, let me know. Hi, Stacy. Good to see you here. Let me know that you're here, where you're from. If you're new today, let me know that in the comments so we can welcome you to our community. And if you are new, you can find our website at mastcell360.com. Jump on our newsletter. We've got a new section coming out with some little short email tips every week that just goes out to the email list. So if you're not on that email list, jump on there to get those extra tidbits each week, and little reminders, little motivations, some fun things I'm pulling together for you guys. All right, so estrogen dominance. This can affect you pretty much any time once you start menstruating, and sometimes we're seeing this even in young children who are premenstrual, but particularly in our reproductive years, in perimenopause, and even menopause. So a reminder that estrogen dominance doesn't just mean high estrogen. That's one form of estrogen dominance. But even when all of our hormones drop off, if we have that estrogen out of balance with the progesterone, that's really what this means. So more estrogen than progesterone can trigger a number of symptoms. Hey, you guys, thanks for putting your names there in the comments. So it's good to see who's on with us. And the other thing I want you to know about estrogen dominance is a reminder of some of these symptoms that can be attributed to this. So one is acne. And I had actually, my hormones had gone down. I had started taking DHEA, which can be very helpful, but I had overshot the amount, which is why it's so important to test. And I started getting acne again. I was getting on my cheeks and getting it along here. And when I retested, I found I was doing too much DHEA, had to back it down. And then that acne started clearing up. So if you go back to that previous blog post we did or Facebook Live, remember that DHEA can convert over into estrogen as well. So it's not that I didn't want any, I just didn't want to go too far. And that's where the testing is really important. I see we've got some questions coming in, so do pop your questions in for me. If you could, please keep them on topic. And anything that's really off topic or really in-depth health questions, I may not be able to get to those, but I'll get to as many on-topic questions as we can. So interestingly, estrogen dominance can also contribute to constipation. So that's one thing to look at. If you've had stubborn constipation, you've tried all the other stuff, you've tried vagal nerve support, might be helpful to look at this. Loss of sex drive, depression, weight gain is well known in estrogen imbalance situations. Menstrual problems, things like the water retention, the heavy periods, the painful periods, PMS. In the research, has also been shown an increased risk of uterine and breast cancer. So it's one of the ways that this is really important to take a look at. Increased risk of cardiovascular disease, fibroids, PCOS, endometriosis, and of course, mast cell reactions. So we talked about how the mast cells have these hormone receptors on the outside. And estrogen can really trigger mast cell reactions if we've got more estrogen than progesterone. Now, of course, we don't want to have no estrogen either because estrogen has important roles in the body. It's all about this balance. Now, there are progesterone receptors as well. And some people do quite well with bioidentical hormones and balancing that estrogen with the progesterone. I have seen some really sensitive people have trouble with that progesterone, and I do think sometimes it has to do with mold being there, and sometimes it just may be needing to clear some of the sensitivities up first. So you have to find the right order for you to introduce these. And this ties in with a question Stacy's asking here. Do you need to detox from mold first before using bioidentical hormones? Hi, Stacy. It's a good question. And you don't necessarily have to get all of the mold out before you start using bioidenticals. It's of course case by case. You want to work with your provider because I don't know your health situation. But I like to see people get the nervous system more calm, get the mast cells more calm, and then you can start looking at, do we need to start detoxing next, or are there a huge amount of symptoms related to estrogen dominance that's maybe keeping somebody from being able to detox? And if some bioidentical hormones are tolerated, then sometimes it makes sense to bring them on even before you do binders. For other people, it'll help them to get those binders on first. So hopefully that's an example of case by case. But no, you don't have to completely finish a mold detox. One of the other things I want to say, though, about this is that the hormone imbalances, if they're being triggered by mold, we're probably not going to get them fixed all the way. So you probably won't get them fixed entirely until you have the mold out. And then you can settle into what's going to be a more stable state for your hormones. But whether we're talking about thyroid hormones, we're talking about things like estrogen and progesterone, you may be following it and chasing it a little bit. So you may be having to continue to test, making sure things aren't going too high or too low as you go through that process. So I hope I'm making sense on that you can certainly start to address hormones while you're getting mold out of your body, but it may be a matter of following those hormones and they may not settle into a more stable place. So that's where working with a practitioner can be helpful if there's a lot of imbalances. So it can get a little tricky, but can also give people a lot of symptom relief. So I don't know that you have to delay that necessarily. We've got some other great questions. Let me get some more of our information in, and then I'll hit some of these other questions as well. So let's talk about what are some of the triggers to estrogen dominance. So things in our environment, we're going to go into that in some more detail. Foods, particularly foods that can be high in growth hormones and estrogen itself. So you'll see that a lot in conventional meat, conventional dairy products. Mold toxins, particularly zearalenone. That's a type of mold. It's often abbreviated ZEA. That one in particular is very estrogenic. It can act like estrogen in our bodies. And it's been known to trigger things like endometriosis, PCOS, menstrual issues, estrogen dominance. A few of the other ones can have estrogen activity, but zearalenone particularly estrogenic. Synthetic hormones, so things like birth control pills that are heavy on estrogen. And there are a few other things. So let's look at a little more detail. So in environment, we're looking at things that are in our skincare products, our cleaning products, Fragrances, so phthalates can be in the fragrance category, big hormone, big estrogen disruptors. These are going to be in a lot of personal care products. It seems like anything these days you pick up at the grocery has fragrance, even laundry detergent, unless it's particularly listed as fragrance free. Deodorants, shampoos, those Glade plugins, fragrance candles. And these can all trigger changes in our hormones for both men and women. And then we've talked about skincare products quite a bit. So what do? Go for the non-toxic skincare, hygiene, beauty products. You can use essential oils if you tolerate those for fragrance, things that are really gentle. And make sure that if you're going to use an essential oil on your skin, it's a gentle one and that it's been diluted down. But I get some from a company I really like called Rocky Mountain Oils. And they have some different blends. And some of them smell, I've got some here on my desk. I was looking to see. Here's a nice one I can show you. This one's called Love. And so it's what I'm enjoying right now. And it's got a nice scent. Now that does have a little orange if you have trouble with citrus. But this is what I use if I want to have a little fragrance on. So we love Anne-Marie Skincare, Primal Life Organics, 100% pure. These don't have those phthalates or those triggers. Some other environmental triggers are going to be the plastics. Particularly you see things like BPA, BPS, BPF, BPAF. So in water bottles, things like sippy cups and bottles for children, especially for babies, if you're reheating in the bottles, those plastics, if they're plastic bottles, it's going to leach into the formula or the breast milk. Food storage containers. I listened to an eye-opening lecture by one of my dear friends and colleagues, Emily Givler, on microplastics. And the research shows that we are all eating the equivalent of a credit card size of plastic every week. A credit card size of plastic, if we're using plastic water bottles, plastic food storage containers, if we're wearing polyesters, and then we're not using a really good water filter. Also, it's showing up in salt. So real salt was low, Celtic sea salt was low, but a lot of the even unrefined sea salts were showing up as high in these microplastics. So something to know about, you guys. I knew plastics were an issue, but I didn't know until I listened to our lecture how significant of an issue that is. So think about 52 credit cards worth of plastic a year the average person is eating. And that has a lot of detrimental effects on our body. So we've got to get away from the plastics and get away from our environmental use of plastics, what we're throwing in. What's getting recycled doesn't really get recycled. A lot of times it makes it out of, it makes it into another country, into a landfill, a lot of those plastics. And then they break down, they're getting into the water, they're getting into the animals. It's a major issue. So anywhere you can get rid of the plastic, either directly what you're consuming or even using the canvas bags, things like that. Trying not to get things in plastic bags. Now, it's only so much we can do, but I'm just chipping away at it a little at a time and looking at each week on, okay, where else can I pull these plastics out of what I'm doing? Also, canned foods. We don't have a lot of people in our community that eat canned foods, but the lining in those canned foods can contain these things like BPAs. And then Teflon, that nonstick cookware. Teflon is a big trigger and has these types of chemicals in it. So that's where you want to use the non-toxic cookware. So we talked about avoiding plastics, particularly those number 7s, number 6s, can be particularly concerning. Use those glass containers or silicone food storage. Ceramic nonstick is a good option. And then use your own stainless steel water bottles. This is my hot drink mug, and it's all stainless steel on the inside, so I don't get anything that's plastic inside. All right, on the food side, then we will get to some supplements and talk about that here soon, but I want to talk about root causes first. So pesticides, GMOs, growth hormones in the produce, the meat, the dairy. You guys know to eat really clean. Wash your produce. particularly if it's not organic. Make sure to wash it really well, but know those pesticides are going to seep through the skin. Use organic as much as you can. Use pasture-raised, hormone-free meats and dairy as much as you can if you're going to do dairy on the meat side, as much as you possibly can. Get away from the hormones in the meats. So some of our favorite partners are Northstar Bison, White Oak Pastures, Vital Choice. We have coupon codes for all of those on our website. Then mold. We talked about zearalenone. This comes from a mold called Fusarium, very estrogenic. Research has shown, this research is quite outdated and needs to be redone because it's higher now. But the studies that came out a couple decades ago showed that over 50% of homes in the United States had toxic mold. That's a lot. And as we get more Wi-Fi devices in homes and we get more extreme weather events, hurricanes, these heavy rains, things like that, then we're going to see more mold in homes. I'm particularly concerned about what Australia has been dealing with. Offices. So I believe the statistic was 80% of offices and retail and commercial workspaces were found to have levels of water damage that are big contributors to toxic mold. Churches frequently close up during the week and they turn off any of their climate control. They may close up for longer periods of time. Schools in the 80s were found, this was before we had Wi-Fi routers all through the schools, in the 80s were found to be 30% of them had toxic mold. The level's higher now. So, you guys know this, to test for mold, test your home, test your workspace, places that you spend time. If your kids are sick, pay attention to where they're going, and the gentle mold detox. That if you have mold toxicity, and particularly have zearalenone or the other estrogenic mycotoxins, then getting this mold out of your body is a huge step. Then the synthetic hormones, these are going to be found in birth control, hormone replacement therapy. I'm not saying that everybody needs to come off synthetic hormones. For some people, this is all that works. And I have had some people who do not tolerate bioidentical. But if you are making a choice, it's usually a good idea to try the bioidentical hormones first if you need hormone replacement. Now, some things that you can do easily if you tolerate these foods is incorporate as much of the cruciferous vegetables as you can, which will allow you to get small amounts of what's called DIM. DIM is a really good compound in these cruciferous vegetables that help balance our different estrogens and help us detox estrogen. Now, unfortunately, if the estrogen dominance is out of control, we won't get it back under control with these by themselves. But this is a good starting point, especially for really sensitive people. And I always want to talk about where can we get things out of foods. So broccoli, the different types of cabbages, cauliflower, dino kale, Brussels sprouts, arugula, radishes, even rutabaga, which is called Swedes in Europe, and daikon. These are great sources of this DIM. Now, if you've got a lot of estrogen dominance, you would have to use several pounds of those. Most of us aren't going to eat several pounds of these every day, and you may want to supplement if you're able to tolerate that. But of these, I know a lot of people in our community have salicylate intolerance. Now, if you don't have to worry about this. But if you have salicylate intolerance, there's a good number of these that are low salicylate as well. So that's the good news. Let's talk about some supplements here. Now, you can if you're looking for supplements, you're welcome to register an account under Mast 360 at Fullscript, and you'll get 15% off anything you order anytime. And then they give us back a little commission that helps support all of our free resources and our Facebook Lives and all of the research that we put out here. So if you wanted to use that and to get any supplements, whether it's what we're talking about here, or they have most of the really good brands, most of the products that people are looking for, You'll find those links to these products in our blog, and Suze will put the blog in the comments and then in the video notes as well, so you can find these products we're talking about. So let's talk about passion flower extract. Passion flower actually grows natively in North America. A lot of people don't know that. So if you've ever seen passion fruit comes from passion flower, and that's a native plant. But the extract is both helps with estrogen dominance, but it has some mast cell stabilizing properties. And research has been shown that it may help with things like night sweats, hot flashes, anxiety, itchiness that are associated with estrogen dominance. So it's a nice, gentle one that I really like. And then another one that helps some people is called chaste tree, which is also called Vitex. And chaste tree extract has been shown in research that it may help with PMS, normalize and balance those estrogen and progesterone levels, can help with just general female reproductive health and regulate menstrual cycles. And the way these are all working is balancing that estrogen progesterone. And then raspberry leaf tea. This is a nice beginning step for people that are really sensitive. You can even brew a really weak cup of tea if you want to start there. And that can help with things like PMS symptoms, cramps, and gut issues. Now, these may not be a silver bullet on their own. So know that you may have to have a synergy of things and work on the root causes. So I just don't want you to think that I'm saying that just passion flower on its own or just chaste tree on its own is going to do it. You may have to combine some things. Then you've got to pay attention to what's going to work best for you. So are you super sensitive? If so, you might start with this tea really weak. If you can take supplements really easily, you could onboard one thing at a time. If you have salicylate intolerance, one of the things I really like is dandelion root tincture. And that's going to be lower salicylate. It supports liver detoxification of estrogens. It can help with inflammation, has been shown in research, and it helps with detoxifying excess estrogen levels. Now let's talk about bioidentical. You can actually get bioidentical progesterone either over the counter or compounded. So if you have really complicated hormone imbalances, if you have any kind of history of any type of hormone sensitive cancer, definitely work with a provider. If you're taking medications, if you have medical conditions, work with a provider so you know what you're doing, what you're getting into, and if this is indicated for you. So I just want to give you information here. This is a company called Bezwecken, and they make a very high quality, over-the-counter available bioidentical progesterone. It's got a funny name called Progon BL. And when there's low progesterone, this can particularly help. And you can see why we want to test and we want to know what is the progesterone level, because if the progesterone levels are high, this wouldn't be appropriate. But that can help with symptoms of PMS, with menopause symptoms as well, is to bring some of that progesterone back on board, because we know that as we go into perimenopause and menopause, progesterone starts going down. But also some things can affect our abilities to make progesterone, things like mold. There's some different ways that you can use this. So I'm just going to go over some ideas. I don't know if this is appropriate for you. Use your judgment, your best judgment, and get some help with a healthcare provider. But if you menstruate, then bioidentical progesterone is usually taken on days 12 to 26 of a 28-day cycle. Now, not everybody has a 28-day cycle. So what if you have a 24-day cycle that time? Then that progesterone is usually stopped when menstruation starts. What if you every month have a 35-day cycle? Then some women might take it for days 12 to 30 or days 12 to 32. And first day of your cycle is the first day of menstruation. So if you're like I was saying, if you have a shorter cycle, you might start 2 days before. You expect if you always have a 26-day cycle, you'd stop on day 24. If you always have a 35-day cycle, you might start around day 33. And if you're not sure, then you do your best. Sensitive people might try 1 drop in water and stirring it. But if it's tolerated, you can put a drop under your tongue. And then how much really depends on your progesterone levels, what you need, what you tolerate. Just as an example, some women will take 1 to 2 drops at bedtime. Others may take 5 to 6 drops at bedtime. So work with your practitioner. Some people feel better if the progesterone is mast cell stabilizing to do a couple drops, 1 to 2 drops in the morning as well. But you definitely, if you're going to do this after about 3 months, recheck your levels. Make sure that you're not overshooting. Now, people who are super sensitive can also use this topically. It doesn't usually tend to raise the testing levels significantly, but topically can be a way to start to onboard it as well. And if you do use it topically, then you might put it in thin skin areas so it'll absorb. You might try it in the wrists and you rotate it. So you could do this wrist one morning and then one evening, then this wrist. You can do the sides of the neck topically. So whatever you do, go very slowly and take your time here. So if someone is in menopause, here's a way that they can use bioidentical progesterone. It's usually taking every day for days 1 through 26 of the month. So let's say we're in February, it would be February 1st through February 26th. If we're in March here and we've got 31 days, it might be March 1st to March 26th. You're just taking a few days off just to let the receptors reset. And it can be started in water or under the tongue, depending on sensitivity levels. Some people add a couple drops, or some people start with just 1 or 2 drops. Some people take 3 to 5 drops. This is all still really low dosing, but do work with your practitioner. And some people also find doing a little under the tongue in the morning can be helpful as well. How do you know if what you're taking is too much? If you get too much progesterone, then you can get breast tenderness, you can get bloating, you can get mood swings. So you may need to back it down. And Adrian had a good point here. Thank you for putting this in. For some women that have hypermobility, too much progesterone can cause ligament laxity. So that's true as well. I have hypermobility. I have had so much estrogen dominance that the bioidentical progesterone really helps me and balances me out. But for some people, you want to watch that. And if you don't have significant estrogen dominance, you may do better working with some of the herbals and may not need that progesterone replacement. So you really have to see what's the right application for you. Now, some people, the progesterone is so mast cell stabilizing that if they when they go off of it for those off days, they feel worse. And I've worked with some women who felt better using a little bit for the whole cycle, 1 to 2 drops. And then they will bump it up on those days 1 through 26. So just an example there. Okay, let's get into some of these detox supports as well. I want to touch on those and we'll do some of our questions. So calcium D-glucarate. This can help remove some of those dirty estrogens that we talked about before. And if that's new to you, go back. Like I said, after this video, you can watch the first video we did on estrogen dominance, or explain the different types of estrogens. But calcium D-glucarate really helps support a pathway in our bodies called glucuronidation. That's a phase 2 liver detox pathway that can help break down the types of estrogens that can be really triggering for our bodies. And then we touched on this one before, but you could take it as a supplement. DIM can help support the pathways that break down this metabolite called 4-OH estrogen, 4-hydroxy estrogen. That's considered one of the dirty estrogen metabolites. that can impact things like DNA damage. So there has been studies linking that one to DNA damage. And again, that's where the testing can be helpful. So you can see how your estrogen is breaking down. And we've got all that covered in that earlier blog post. And then DIM can help balance the 3 types of estrogens we've talked about. So the estrone, the estriol, the estradiol. And DIM has been tolerated by a lot of people with salicylate intolerance. So if you're going to try DIM and you have salicylate intolerance, start really low and go slowly. But I have seen that people with salicylate intolerance are doing okay with smaller amounts of DIM. So those are some tips for you. But again, always test. I really like the Dutch hormone test. We've got a link for you where you can order this on your own if you need to get it. And a reminder that work with your medical provider if you have any medical conditions, you're taking any medications, or you've ever had any kind of hormone receptor sensitive cancer. So we've had a lot of questions come in. Let me see how much we can hit on here. And I wanted to start with one from Jody. Do you realize it's difficult to find a practitioner that knows any of these things? I know it can be challenging, Jody, and you're right on that. So one of the better places to start looking, so we do have a practice, Jody, consulting practice. And then if you're looking for somebody who's going to diagnose, who's going to prescribe, looking for people who are certified in functional medicine is usually a better place to start looking. So people who are certified in functional medicine will have studied the bioidenticals. They're going to know about these different types of estrogens and so on. So hopefully that helps you. All right, let me see where I left off here with the questions. Mandy's asking, what do you think the correlation between MCAS and estrogen dominance has with interstitial cystitis? I don't know if that's been researched. It would be good to know. I haven't seen research on it, but it may be out there. But mast cell activation, we have a lot of mast cells in the bladder and lining the urethra. When we have increased sensitivity to those mast cells in those areas, anything that's triggering them can increase interstitial cystitis. Oxalates have a big link with that. Estrogen dominance may trigger it, particularly if you see that it flares. If you're menstruating, does it flare around ovulation and flare again, coming close to menstruation? Then estrogen dominance may be triggering it. Mold can trigger it. High histamine foods can trigger it. Also things that are really acidic. So some people find certain foods that aren't high histamine may trigger. So we're really looking at what's underneath and all the various factors triggering those mast cells in the bladder and in the urethra there. Adrian's asking about nettle tea and other histamine-lowering teas like hibiscus or endocrine disruptors and lowered her estrogen. I don't know, Adrian. I haven't seen that myself. And saying the testing showed a considerable effect. I haven't seen that from teas. I have seen calcium D-glucarate lower estrogen too much if people were taking more than they needed. And that's why it's good to do that follow-up testing. I'd be curious if you have any more information about that. I'd love to take a look at it and read what you're noticing. But I typically find that teas are usually more gentle for people. You may be just extremely sensitive to them for some reason, and there can always be numerous factors happening, right, at the same time. Shannon asking, can you get mold toxicity? Shannon, let me refer you over to our mold blogs. I'm going to try to stay on topic here around estrogen dominance, but our mold blogs will have a lot more information for you over there. Short answer is that depends on how your detox pathways are. Most likely 20 minutes one time in your whole lifetime, no, but that's rarely the case for people. Talking about toxins and these types of triggers for estrogen, wet hair dye. It is tricky, Louise, and I had asked a couple years ago for our audience to give me every possible hair coloring that they thought would be non-toxic, and we had a long list, and I looked every one of them up, and they all had some kind of toxin in them. The only things that don't are things like henna and chamomile, which of course don't last very long. So I don't have a good answer to this right now. Anything that's out there so far, even if it's listed as organic, it's still not non-toxic. I'm hoping something is developed in the future. But in the meantime, I'm choosing to not dye my hair, and I am slowly going gray, really white. It's very white, but it's blending in so far. And if you can't give this up, if you're just not in a place where you're going to give it up, it's very important to not let it touch your scalp. And it would be good if you could wear a mask with a filter so you're not breathing it in. So I wish I had a better answer, Louise. That's a hard one for everyone who wants to dye their hair. So Adrian's saying, I've read that luteolin and quercetin were endocrine disruptors. So it depends when you're reading these studies, take a look at the dosages that they were given. A lot of times in the animal studies, they're giving huge dosages that are not used in people. Quercetin in huge doses can also affect the thyroid, but that doesn't necessarily translate to the in normal doses. We're going to have trouble with it. And we also have to weigh how much benefit are we getting on the mast cell side and just stabilizing inflammation. So I don't want us to throw out the baby with the bathwater, but for some people are going to have different sensitivity levels for those different receptors, and yours could be exquisitely sensitive, much more than even our normal sensitive people in this population. So you have to see for you and weigh it for you, but just really look at those studies that you're seeing and see what kind of dosages and what was the sample size. So if you've only got 5 or 10 or 15 animals or people in a sample size, it's too small. You really need these bigger scale studies to weigh it. And again, everybody's different. So what it comes down to is what works for you. And that's the most important thing. Shannon, when we're talking about the microplastics, the Himalayan salt did have a lot of plastics in it, unfortunately. So I'm staying with the real salt because it has more minerals than Celtic, but Celtic also is a good option. Okay, Shan's asking, how do you wash your produce? I just use my non-toxic hand soap or dish soap and just wash the outside of it. So that's what I do and rinse it really well. If it's lettuce, that's hard to wash. So I'm talking about like a piece of fruit or something that has some skin on it. And if it's something like lettuce, I make sure I get organic and I rinse that. Let's see, and then Tashina's saying that she's found that nettle helps with her cramps and she uses a non-citrus quercetin. So that's good examples of where we get all these different experiences in our community. Elizabeth's asking, does Progon BL cause uterine thickening over time? It should not. So that's the bioidentical progesterone. Synthetic hormones may, but at least in the kind of dosages we're talking about for that Progon BL, that's a really gentle, very low dose, as opposed to, say, a compounded prescription, where if you're getting into the higher dosing, you need a medical provider to work with you on that. But it shouldn't cause that. So Stacy's asking, what if you don't have detox or methylation issues with estrogen still built up in the liver? Well, probably not, but most people in our community have detox issues as part of how they get here. So one question I also wonder is, how would you know if you have detox issues? The only way to really know if you have methylation issues is to do a full methylation panel, which includes about 15 markers. And that has to be ordered through a provider. But can estrogen still build up in the liver? I mean, just depends. That's a challenging question. It's an interesting question. So I don't know, Stacey. I don't know many people who have health issues who don't have detox issues. So I'm not sure there. People asking about how to test for estrogen dominance. Check our previous post. We went into NVIDIA, went into a lot of details there. Katie's asking, how common is estrogen dominance? I see it quite a bit, but I have seen some cases of progesterone dominance where progesterone was way higher than it should have been. And that's, again, where we want to test, particularly in this population. Everybody that I work with is off the map. So what that means is that your protocols that are out there, your health advice, the information that you're going to find online or what most practitioners would do is targeted at 80% of the population. And that's what's considered the gold standard in healthcare, is if what you're doing can help 80% of the population, it's considered excellent, just top of the top. If you're helping 80% of the population, that means 20% aren't going to be helped by that. And in that 20%, then those are the people that usually end up looking on their own. They're not getting helped, or they can't tolerate the regular protocol. So what we're focusing on is the 20%. And that's why I always say, well, it depends, because I don't have anything that can work across the board, and we just have to see. But I do find that estrogen dominance tends to be fairly common. If we're off the map, though, things can be different than what they appear. And that's why testing is even more important in this kind of environment or this kind of audience. And then Andrew's asking, do these supplements apply to men? That's a good question, Andrew. It depends. If there is some estrogen dominant, and some men have no progesterone. So if there's no progesterone, then there may be some application there. But generally more things like calcium D-glucarate and DIM might be used for men. So great question there, Andrew. Louise is asking, is there a significant difference between the over-the-counter progesterone and the prescribed bioidentical progesterone? So there are a lot of over-the-counter progesterones. Some are better quality and some are not good quality. So would not just pick up anything. The Bezwecken is what's called a pharmaceutical grade, or it's USP grade. And that stands for US Pharmacopoeia. That's really important to see on things that are hormones, even melatonin, which is a hormone. I like for that to be in one of these higher grade brands that get third-party testing to make sure you're getting the same dosage per capsule, or in this over-the-counter progesterone, same dosage per drop. So I really like the Bezwecken, or Biomatrix is another good brand that has that kind of quality. A lot of the over-the-counter progesterone is not going to have that, so I'd be careful with those. If you're going to go outside of those brands, make sure that they've been third-party tested and they're going to have the same dosage per drop. And then the prescribed bioidentical. A lot of it is going to be your available dosage, Louise. So, for example, you might be getting just a few milligrams in the over-the-counter progesterone, very low dosing, very gentle, whereas the bioidentical, you're usually looking at 50 to 200 milligrams. So you're going to get that higher dose there. Bree's asking, how long before you start seeing benefits from supplements such as calcium D-glucarate? I would love to be able to have a really clear answer to that, because of course everybody wants to know. I want to know, but it just depends case by case. And when people are taking supplements, it depends on, are the root causes getting addressed? How significant is this issue? How long does it take to get it onboarded? Is there a synergy of the right supplements? On the short end, it could be 2 or 3 months. For some people, it may take a year or longer. So that's a tricky one. And again, everyone being off the map here, I don't have the ability to give those kinds of timelines. Like if this was just kind of general health and you guys weren't sensitive and didn't have a lot of things going on, but that's what we specialize in, right? So unfortunately, that's probably not the answer you wanted, but that's the best one I can give. Okay, and then Adrian did have a good tip here that you can go to ifm.org. They have lists of functional medicine practitioners and lots of options that are out there for people now. So this has really exploded. You still have to check people out, check their reviews, ask them if they've dealt with the issues you're dealing with and what do they know. A lot of people end up with a functional medicine provider as a main provider. And then they find somebody who really specializes in sensitivities and mast cell activation to consult on their case and give some guidelines on that angle. So that's another way that some people work. Shan's asking, where can we read more about Emily Givler's talk on microplastics? It was part of a practitioner conference, but Shan, if you Google Emily Givler, Givler, microplastics, you'll be able to find probably, I think there's a podcast out there that she's done on it, and it'd be really worth listening to. Okay, Jonathan's asking, when during the menstrual cycle is estrogen high? So it's going to be highest around ovulation. So that's where people, if you have a normal ovulation about the middle of your cycle or around days 19, 20, 21-ish, it kind of tends to be the, I hate to say normal, but what's considered normal ovulation. Estrogen is going to be highest then. We also want to look at the estrogen progesterone ratio. So estrogen is going to be higher, progesterone is going to be high as well, but lower than estrogen at that point. Then as you're heading into menstruation, both are going to drop down. But then when you're a couple of days before menstruation, estrogen is going to be higher than that progesterone again. So this is where people sometimes feel worse in the middle of the cycle and they feel worse coming into menstruation. Then the progesterone is going to start coming up and they'll feel better when they start menstruating or a few days into menstruation or after that menstruation. Jody, I do hear it's frustrating. I'm not sure how else to help. I can't fix the problem, but I do know that it's hard. I can just give resources. And then Laura's asking, is there a way to detox plastic if we can't avoid the microplastics? Glucuronidation does help detox plastic. So things like calcium deglucarate, if you don't have really low estrogen, can sometimes help. Dandelion root helps that glucuronidation. Getting out other things that are a load on the glucuronidation pathway, like mold toxins and things like that, can help. But there's always some things we can do to help reduce some of that microplastic, like water filters and trying to avoid polyester clothing. Like we absorb the microplastics through our skin. So things like that can help. All right, everybody, I'm going to try to take a couple more questions here. So Jonathan, yeah, we covered the side effects of taking the progesterone. So if you missed it, you can check the video out. Just go right back in as soon as we're done here and pick that up, or check out the blog post. We've got some things in there about it as well. Elizabeth asking, can progesterone help with premature ovarian failure? I don't know about that. It's a good question, but it's not an area I'm familiar with, so I'm not sure. Okay, any suggestions for GI motility happening before menstruation ovulation? Sounds like you think that it may be related to estrogen dominance. So, Marie Noel, maybe, you always want to go through those basic things like the magnesium, fibers, and digestive enzymes, vagal nerve supports, and then if it, test your hormones, particularly since it seems cyclical, then you may be able to implement some of these reports and see. Have hysterectomies helped alleviate these issues, or does it make it worse? Well, that's a good question as well, and I may not be the best qualified to really answer that, but I'll give you some of my take. But you really need to have these conversations with your medical practitioner because it depends on your scenario, of course. If you just have the hysterectomy but you leave the ovaries, you're going to still have your hormones, and it's a challenging surgery to recover from. But that's an option. If the ovaries are removed as well, you're not going to have the hormone production from the ovaries. You can have a little estrogen, progesterone made in the adrenals, but then that has its own set of problems. So these are challenging questions. Now, some people have had such terrible fibroids or endometriosis that may be worthwhile for them. So just want to encourage people to make a case-by-case decision for yourself, weigh all of your options there. Stacey's asking about sauna. So sauna can help. I would have binders on board first before you go into sauna and go really slowly, like 10 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes, and maybe 20 minutes 3 times a week is usually plenty for sensitive people. Regina's asking about oxalate issues and calcium D-glucarate. Calcium D-glucarate is going to be very low, if not no oxalate. So sometimes that may be helpful because that calcium side of it could bind some of those oxalates. And then, Bree, we touched on this early in, if you still have high levels of mold, is it worth trying to balance hormones? It can be very helpful for helping to keep people comfortable, but knowing that it can be a moving target, you may have to keep checking and tinkering while you're getting the mold out because they are hormone disruptors and they're going to disrupt in different ways as it's coming out. But I don't know that you should or need to wait until the mold's entirely out to do anything. I think keeping people comfortable has a lot of benefit. And there was more in the earlier part of this video if you want to go back. I know you probably came in after we talked about that. All right, you guys. We've had a lot of great questions here. Let me just touch on a couple more. A reminder that I can only get to the questions that are on topic, or we would be here for hours, which I'd love to do with you guys, but I'm not able to fit in here. Alicia's asking, do you need a prescription for the Dutch hormone test? You do not. You can order it on your own. So Suze can put a link in for you. And I want to thank Suze for all the work she does behind the scenes to help us. And so Suze will get that for you. And you can find a lot more detail about that, Alicia, in our previous blog post on it and previous Facebook Live on testing estrogen. And we'll finish today with this one from Jonalyn. Do binders bind to hormones? I have seen binders potentially bind to oral or the patch hormones. Not consistently. I've only seen that happen for people twice with the patch hormones. With the oral hormones, it's important to take the binders 2 hours after you take oral hormones or an hour before so that you keep the binders away from it in the GI tract. But I did have just a couple people who were really sensitive that were using the patch continual release hormones, and they did have a little trouble. So they had to work with their prescriber on that in terms of how they were going to get the binders on board and what to do with the hormones. All right, everybody, it's been really good to be with you today. I hope this was helpful. As always, be sure to use your best judgment in terms of what you're onboarding. If you're sensitive, go really slow. Start one thing at a time. I know that this condition is really complex and it's a lot to put all the pieces together, but I hope that we're providing little step-by-step chunks for you that you can work with. And don't forget, you can find tons of free resources on our website. And if you're not sure where to get started, then check out the courses. They go in order with the nervous system course, the supplements course, and then the mold course. And those are always really good ways to get going here in the beginning. So have a wonderful week. No matter what happens, keep going, keep putting one foot in front of the other. And the people that keep going no matter what, those are the people that do get there and get better. Talk to you guys soon. Bye-bye.